Hello students, in the previous lecture we were discussing about the issue of how to make international relations a global discipline. We will continue this discussion, and in the previous lecture we discussed particularly the debate about the international character of the discipline, and then we also discussed the perspective from the global south about four important issues: the theoretical problem associated with international relations, the conceptual issues, the methodological problems, and then there were some policy issues, and we concluded that how there is an ethnocentric character in international relations, how there is a dominance of the Eurocentrism in the discipline of international relations, how American theories, American concepts, American methodologies, they are all dominant in the discipline of international relations. So, we will now discuss particularly on some other issues like what has been the impact of this Eurocentrism in the discipline of international relations. Then we will also try to understand the views from the West about this ethnocentric character of the discipline and what has been the perception of many European and American scholars on this issue. Then we will be talking about the movement towards a non-Western theory. As you know, there are several countries those who are working on a theory from their own perspective, or there is what you call the international relations with Chinese characteristics, or there is also a debate on whether India should have a similar international relations theory with Indian characteristics. So, we will discuss about this issue. So, let us now start what has been the impact of Eurocentrism in the discipline of international relations, or how the dominance of America in international relations theories, concepts, methodologies, and in policy arena, how that has affected the understanding of international relations in non-Western countries or the countries belonging to global south. There are several implications. First is the Western dominance leads to the prioritization of English language scholarship or scholarship written by Western scholars over Indian or Indonesian academic works. So, if you look at the Eurocentrism problem in international relations, so that has created the problem that most of the scholarship are in English language, or the scholarship particularly is or the research work is particularly made by the Western scholars, and that gives a priority to the Western scholarship of international relations over the Indian, or say for example Indonesian academic works. For example, the Indian international relations students ironically are more familiar with the writings of Machiavelli and Morganto than Kautilya or Thiruvallu were. So, the point is even if they are great philosophers, Kautilya's Arthashastra, it is considered as a very important work on statecraft, on interstate relations, on international relations, or even the Tamilian scholar Thiruvalluvar, he has also given the idea of understanding the statecraft issue or the role of the kings, particularly in the management of the state. So, these issues are not understood by the Indian scholars because everybody is familiar with the Western scholars. Maybe it is Morganto, maybe it is Machiavelli, or maybe Kenneth Walters. This problem is there because of the Western dominance on the higher scholarship. The Western dominance also leads to the non-acknowledgement of non-Western scholars in international relations discipline, particularly in their own country. So, nobody knows about our international relations scholars. Everybody knows European thought, European philosophers, European ideas, European thinkers. So, same is not the case with our own thinkers, our own scholars. Moreover, the gatekeeping and differentiation between international relations and non-Western international relations also discourages students from elaborating on the Indian case in their own research, which also leads to a lack of engagement with Indian scholarship. So, in a way, your scholars, or you are cut off from what is happening in your part of the country, in your literature. If you look at ancient India's texts like Mahabharata, Ramayana, you will find that maybe Hanuman is one of the best diplomats. He had all the qualities of being a great diplomat. Or if you look at Mahabharata, you will also find that Lord Krishna, he was also one of the greatest diplomat. So because they had those qualities of a diplomat that you may find nowadays in European writings, but they were the people who were having strength, having power, and also having good diplomatic qualities. Same is the case with Angad, who was a diplomat of Lord Ram, and he also went to Ravan with the message of Lord Ram. So if you look at those issues, they can be the good examples in understanding the modern diplomacy, but we are cut off from this kind of our own works because of the dominance of Eurocentrism in the discipline of international relations. Thus, international knowledge produced in the United States is spread and reproduced around the world. So, what is there in realism, what is there in liberalism, what is there in the critical theories, what is there in European history, American culture. So, everything is dominant in the non-Western part of the world. If you want to know something about your own scholars, something about your own text, something about your own history, it is not easily available because you start with the Western political thought, you start with Plato, you start with Machiavelli, you start with Aristotle, you don't know much about Gandhiji, Thiruvalluvar, or maybe Kautilya. So that is the problem with this, because of the dominance of the Western mode of thinking, the Western idea of international relations in India, in non-Western countries, because of colonialism, because of imperialism. That the dominance of the English language in the pedagogical structures, published articles in high quality peer reviewed journals, the use of binaries in the English language not only perpetuates hierarchies but also exerts a hegemonic influence on the field, privileging the concerns, perspectives and methods favored by American scholars and publishers. So, how this kind of Western dominance is retained till today, it's because of the English language through which we teach international relations, the published articles and in the peer reviewed journals in Europe or in America, the use of binaries in the English language as north and south or east or west. So these kind of thinkings that perpetuates the kind of hierarchies between the West and the rest, and also it exerts a kind of hegemonic influence on the field, particularly privileging the American concerns, American ideologies, American perspectives or American methods, and or the American scholars who popularize and use this in their research, in their academic activity. When you think of Eurocentrism in international relations, that makes you cut off from your own culture, own history, own civilization or own literature. So that is the major problem with the impact of Eurocentrism on your own thinking. So we discussed about the non-Western perspective of the problem of Eurocentrism in international relations. Now let me focus on the views of some of the Western scholars who look at the issue of Eurocentrism and how they look at this issue. So basically this is the issue. So first, they think that if empirical social science is all about universal knowledge, why not allow it to travel the world with the most sophisticated tools and latest available methods? So the argument is, if you have the best knowledge, if you have the best theories, if you have the best research methods, so there is no wrong if the other countries are following it or other scholars are following it. So that is the main argument of those who think that Eurocentrism is not a problem, because the Western IR, the American IR, they are the best, and if their methods are best, if their analysis is good, so there is no harm for other countries to borrow those ideas or to get influenced by those ideas. Second, while it is often the case that many national international communities seem to be susceptible to embracing American theories, trends and debates, IR is quite different in different places. So the second argument is, of course you are influenced by the American writings or American scholarship on international relations, but at present there are so many countries, those who are having or those who are developing their own theories of international relations. Take the example of Denmark, take the example of Italy, Japan or Russia, or even the rising powers like India or China, those who are developing their own theory of international relations, that may not be synonymous with the developments in the United States, or they are not following the same kind of model, same kind of history as that was with the case of United States. Third, it is not that the Western scholarship has been completely ignorant to the intellectual and political interest of non-Western worlds. So, those who are particularly talking about the problem of Eurocentrism in international relations, they are of the view that even some of the Western scholarships, some of the American scholarship, they have raised the issue of the non-Western countries, the countries belonging to the South, global South. So, for example, in the late 1970s, critical theorists like Robert Cox examined calls emanating from the global South for a new international economic order that aimed to radically restructure the world economy to eradicate injustice and inequality in trade. So basically, Robert Cox was the international relation theorist who gave that famous statement, theory is always by someone for some purpose. So citing the example of Robert Cox, who was talking of new international economic order that would take into account the interests, the voices of the countries belonging to global South, So he was raising this issue. It's not that he is talking about something which is not relevant to the countries of the global South. So that is one example given by the Western scholars on the issue of Eurocentrism in international relations. Then in 1980s, the English school theorist, the British international relations scholar Hedley Bull described the anti-colonial movement of developing states that challenged the colonial structures and legacies of international society. So Hedley Bull was also highlighting what is happening in the anti-colonial movement of the developing countries or the countries belonging to global South that challenge the colonial structures and legacies related to international society. Moreover, a more radical critique of IR theory was offered by Walker, who argued that international relations was essentially a European or Western tradition of thought. So it is not that the question of Eurocentrism is highlighted by the scholars of global South. Rather, Walker also highlighted this issue in 1981. Finally, notwithstanding the global impact of the American model, there are many indigenously scholarly communities that have their own unique disciplinary history, like the English school. So the American scholars, they cite the example of the Europe International Society approach or the developed by the English school that somehow takes a different path. So if the English school following a path different from the American path, so it's not that the American scholars are hegemonic or they have the hegemony in international relations. So it is also the UK scholars who are talking of international society, and there is the English school we teach in international relations. So these communities have certainly been deeply impacted by the theoretical and methodological developments in the United States, but there are nevertheless differences in how the subject is studied in different parts of the world. So the argument goes on like this. So all the countries, the scholars of the global South, the scholars of the non-Western countries, they have been greatly impacted by the methodological tools related to data collection, tools related to theorization, the conceptual issues, but they are following a different path if you look at the development of international relations in other parts of the world. So that is basically the view. So it's not a question of Eurocentrism has badly impacted the indigenous scholarship on international relations. Rather, they think that this issue to some extent has been addressed by the IR scholars belonging to the global North or belonging to America and Europe. Now let me focus about the movement towards a non-Western theory. Based on an analysis of what is taught to the graduate students at 23 American and European universities, some IR scholars have found that none of the 23 schools surveyed draws on non-Western scholarship to explain international politics. So a survey was conducted and it found that the students, those who are studying international politics or international relations, they had no idea of the non-Western scholarship. It is therefore no surprising that many critical IR scholars have called for broadening the theoretical horizon of international relations beyond the current Eurocentrism by developing new theories and concepts from their own perspective. So because of this problem of Eurocentrism, scholars in the global south, scholars belonging to the non-western part of the world, they have called to go beyond the Eurocentrism of international relations, and that is possible only when you develop your own theories and concept from your own perspective. But some analysts argue that since traditional international relation paradigms are derived from the West, and so they are not necessarily applicable to non-Western countries, so there should be a non-Western IR theory. So many scholars of the global south, they argue that because most of the mainstream theories, most of the IR paradigms, most of the IR concepts, they are not applicable to the situation of the global south. So there is a need for developing a non-Western IR theory based on the experience of these countries, based on their culture, based on their civilization, based on their history. So that is the main argument. Others call for introducing case studies from China, India, Japan and Southeast Asia to broaden, diversify and enrich international relations theory. So basically you will find that there are two types of calls. One is to develop your own theory of international relations. The other is to broaden the discipline of international relations by taking the case studies of India, Japan, China, Southeast Asian countries, even Africa and Latin America. Even the debate is on, debate is there on non-Western international relations theory, but this debate is not uniform in the sense that scholars are having different viewpoints on this debate. Contemporary events such as the rise of China and India and other economies have contributed to the development of non-Western or indigenous theories and concepts. So major development in international relations, particularly after the end of the Cold War and disintegration of the Soviet Union, there have been major changes, and one major change, particularly in the early decades of the millennium, is the rise of India and China as major economic powers, major world powers. There is also a realization that these countries should have their own school of international studies, their own understanding, their own scholarship of international studies that would support, that would expect them to work for international relations, and the world is also equally curious to know about their perception, their views, their understanding of international relations. And you also when you rise as a major power, you need your own international relations theory and perspectives to explain your perception of the world and you rise as a world power or global power. So advocates of the Chinese international relations and by extension the non-Western international relations theory building often point out that Asia has histories, cultures, norms and worldviews that are inherently different from those derived from Europe. So basically those who argue for a non-Western theory in international relations, they think that it's not that everything associated with Europe is conducive for developing a theory. Asia is the largest continent of the world. It is inhabited by so many great powers, so many countries having civilizational history. So you can derive a theory, or you can formulate a theory, or you can develop IR scholarship by using the histories, cultures, norms and worldviews of those countries. So that would definitely help you to develop a non-Western international relations theory. The scholarly practices of building an international relations theory with Chinese characteristics is an interesting example. Although there is no consensus on what the Chinese characteristics actually mean, many scholars and non-Chinese scholars hold that the establishment of a Chinese international relations theory or a Chinese school of international relations is highly desirable, even necessary. The point is, you have a recorded history of so many thousand years, so you have rich resources that can actually help for formulating your own theory of international relations. The Confucianism, Marxism and Tingxia, all under the heaven, what we call in English, and the Chinese tributary system are all cited or as theoretical resources for the Chinese international relations. So there are thinkers like Confucius, like Mao, like many other Marxist, and the Tingxia system, that is all under heaven, and the Chinese tributary system. So they are all important, and they can greatly influence, and they can richly contribute also for the development of international relationship with Chinese characteristics, or international relations theory with Chinese characteristics. The Indian scholars have also taken the call very seriously and undertaken a lot of work on Arthashastra and other Indian traditional resources. So it's not that the Chinese are thinking about their own theory of international relations, and you will be feeling happy that the Indian Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis, they have started a separate project on the recent relevance of the Kautilyan statecraft, or the Kautilya's Mandal theory. So India has also similar kind of rich resources that can help to develop the kind of international relations theory that would be a great help for understanding India's position in international relations. For example, Kautilya's Arthashastra has been compared to a treatise on realpolitik and viewed as a pioneer to realism. This has increased interest in fueling research and dialogues on Arthashastra in India amidst calls for theorizing from the traditional Indian text to accompany the rise of India. So as I said, because India is rising as a major power, so there is not only an interest by the Indians to understand their culture, to present their theory based on Indian culture and history. Rather, all over the world, other countries are also interested to know what the rising power India is thinking about the world, what is its perception about global governance. So as India is emerging as a rising power, as a major world power, so there is an interest among the Indian scholars to develop a theory that would better explain the rise of India, and not you will understand your rise from the European perspective or from the American perspective. You should have your own perspective, what India thinks about global governance, what India thinks about climate change, what India thinks about global commons, what India thinks about nuclear proliferation issue. So you should have your own perspective on international relations, because you are rising a major power. So you should not just borrow the ideas of America, borrow the ideas of UK or Europe to explain your rise. So you should have your own scholarship that would complement your rise, that would support your rise. Vedic ideas about strategy and politics have been raised as the justification of India's acquisition of nuclear weapons. So when India conducted a nuclear test in 1974, which was called as peaceful nuclear explosion, and thereafter India conducted the nuclear test in 1998. So that was a nuclear weapon test. So, and when this test actually happened, there was a lot of criticism. So you have to give a different kind of explanation. You have to give your own explanation, and that explanation was based on Vedic ideas of strategy and politics. And there is a talk of China's threat factor in developing nuclear weapons. Whenever there was a issue in South Asia, there was always the talk of India and Pakistan. So the Western scholars, they were not very sensitive about India's security problems from China. So India cited the Chinese reason for developing nuclear weapons. So so nowadays they have started understanding India's position on nuclear weapons and nuclear issue. So that is the problem. Others will always stick to the guns, but you have to explain your own position. You have to give your own explanation. So that is how international politics actually operates. Drawing on these interventions, recent scholarships goes further by looking at the discipline of international relations in the global south, and many countries like Turkey, Indonesia, Brazil and South Korea, they are also working on their version of international relations. So it's not that India and Chinese scholars, they are thinking of their own school of international relations or own theory of international relations. Other powers, they have also started, they are also working on their version of international relations theory. The hold of Eurocentrism through English language publication standards that conform to the Anglo-American writing styles, gatekeeping and publication practices of peer-reviewed journals, explain the challenge of crafting a robust international relations discipline in these countries beside resource constraints. So it's not that everybody is successful or all the scholars they are developing their own school of international relations without any problem. There are so many problems because you have to work in a system. There may be resource constraints for developing your own school of international relations. There may be other problems like the Eurocentrism. Whatever international relations books are there, whatever scholarship are there, they are all written by the American scholars or European scholars. So how you can break that linkage with those kind of scholarship, and you develop your own school of international relations by citing your own sources, by referencing your own sources, your own text, history, culture and civilization. So that is in fact a challenge for developing a non-Western theory of international relations, not just in India but in many other countries. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. We discussed how Western dominance leads to prioritization of English language, international relations scholarship over indigenous academic works, and how international knowledge produced in the United States is spread and reproduced around the world, privileging concerns, perspectives and methods favored by the American scholars and publishing houses. Then we also discussed about the views of the Western scholars, especially their counter-argument that although the indigenous scholarly communities are impacted by theoretical and methodological developments in the United States, yet there are differences in how international relations is studied in different parts of the world. Then we discussed that since traditional international relations paradigms are derived from the West and non-applicable to the global South, there is a need for a non-Western international relations theory. In the next lecture, we will continue our discussion on this issue, especially focusing on the criticisms against a non-Western international relations theory and the movement towards the global international relations discipline. Thank you for your attention. Thank you once again.